Hi, Peter Charles here, Folk to Life Fly Fishing. And today I thought in this video we'd look at some of the gear I use when I do some photography out on the water. Now, today's video is going to be mostly focused towards still photography and the gear I prefer to use, with a little bit of a reference to video. I'm going to be doing a second video on my outdoor video equipment and how I go about doing that as well, in case any of you want to get into that. So today I'll do a little bit of video information, but most of it is going to be on still photography, and with a focus on the gear and how I use it. So let's go look at my favorite camera, which is this little beastie right here. This is an Olympus TG5. There's now a TG6 out, which is the same camera with some enhancements. Why this camera over some of the others? Because it's not cheap. The TG5 is probably one of the most expensive waterproof point shoots on the market right now. Well, it's good down to 30 feet or a little bit more. You can drop it from about 6 feet and it'll survive. So it's a tough little camera. It's certainly excellent for our use, and it's quite small. It'll fit in a pocket. Very well built. There are cheaper alternatives out there. So why did I pick this one, and why do I recommend this one as opposed to the cheaper alternatives? Well, there's a few things about this that make it interesting. First off, let's talk about the zoom lens. It's a 4x zoom, and it's 25 to 100 in 35mm equivalency. However, I want you to take a look at that aperture. It's an f2 to 4.9. f2 is quite bright at the wide angle lens. I don't think there's another point and shoot out there that's that bright. So what this means for us is its low light capability is quite good. When you have what we call a fast lens, which is a large maximum aperture, it means your ability to take pictures in low light is enhanced. Also, it gives you a shallower depth of field if you want to do that. It gives you lots of options that slower lenses don't have, which have smaller maximum apertures. So that's one good thing. Plus, it's a 4x zoom, 25 to 100 in 35mm terms. So that is quite handy. Another thing I really love about this camera is superb macro, and more important, the macro is at the 100mm end of the zoom, the long end of the zoom. So that means my working distance for my macro is about like that if I'm at maximum macro. If a lot of cameras have their macro function at the wide angle end, which is next to useless because you're about that far away from your subject when you're trying to take a macro shot at the wide angle end. So the fact that this has excellent macro and it's at the telephoto end is a real bonus. The other thing is there's no special flipping when you want to move in and out of macro. You can be way back, get the picture, and then come in tight and get the picture, and you're not sitting there pushing buttons and trying to jiggle things. I mean, it's great in that sense. It's just move in, move out. Very uncomplicated to get in and out of macro. I mean, there's some cameras that have buttons. Sometimes you have to go into the menu. Crappy stuff. You don't want to do that. So macro is excellent. In fact, I used to use this camera as my video camera for my fly tying. It was my close-up camera for my fly tying for quite a long time. So that gives you an idea of its capabilities. It has full auto function, autofocus, auto exposure, auto white balance, auto ISO. It has all of those functions you normally assume a point and shoot would have. However, it's also got full manual control. You can have manual focus, manual exposure, manual white balance, so manual focus. So you don't have to rely on the automatics if you don't want to. You can flip this thing completely manual, and you can work as a completely manual camera, which is what I used to do when I shot my videos. I was working mostly on manual, and it worked just fine. It does have some limitations versus interchangeable lens camera, which is built to be used in macro. So it is a bit more of a fiddle than a standard camera, but nevertheless it can be done if you need to do it. A couple of other things that's interesting. You can see there's the command dial, and you can see you've got the movie mode and you've got a fish, which is the underwater mode, which is quite handy. Plus you've got a dedicated macro mode if you want to use it, but it's not necessary. and you have this control here, which is quite useful, and you can use this for a variety of functionality, including the built-in flash and various timer functions for your shutter. So there's a lot of capability built into that. But I think the most important feature of this camera for me, the way this camera compared to other cameras, is that black dial on the top beside the shutter button. That's an exposure compensation dial. And what makes that so important is you get into these high contrast scenes that we get into in fishing, where you've got, let's say, a dark tree line and your subject is in front of the dark tree line, and you take a picture and your camera exposes for the dark tree line, and you end up with your subject being overexposed and sort of washed out and quite crappy looking. So what you can do is you can use this to darken down, still stay on automatic, but you darken down the exposure so the subject now is properly exposed and the tree line is dark the way it's supposed to be. Because our cameras, the meters in our cameras try to turn everything to 18% reflectance, which is medium gray. So it views everything as medium gray. So when you use this compensation dial, if the scene is too dark, you can brighten it up. If the scene is too light, you can darken it down. And you can just simply turn this dial backwards and forwards, and you can see the effect on the rear screen, which is nice. You can look at the rear screen and move up and down and get the right exposure. I use this function a lot when I'm out. And a lot of cameras, waterproof cameras, don't have that, because when you add extra elements like this, you make the camera more expensive, plus you give it another point for water to enter the camera, so that all has to be sealed to keep the camera waterproof. So, I mean, as I say, a lot of companies will avoid that because of those reasons. So this exposure compensation dial is often the key to getting a good image when you're out in the river and you're dealing with these high contrast situations. And it's very easy to use. You're just turning the dial back and forth, and you can see the effect on the rear screen. So you don't have to understand the plus or minus so many stops and stuff like that. You just look at the rear screen and move the dial. If you move it the wrong direction, you'll see it get too light, so you move it in the other direction. It can't get much simpler. So the presence of this dial for me is a real bonus. Now for other people, you've got this GPS and Wi-Fi capability. I don't use it because it's a battery killer and I don't have any need for it. But if you have a need for it, it's there. Now, something else, if you're getting into video, 99.99% of the people will never use that log function. Leave it off all of the time. But what this thing does, and this is what's amazing in a point and shoot, it will produce log footage in video. Now, what that is it looks really washed out if you use it straight out of the camera, but that enables you to apply what's called a LUT, lookup table, that will color grade that image, and it deals with the high contrast situations. So you can get into a really high contrast situation where you're shooting video, turn that to log, and it'll handle the high contrast perfectly, and then when you're in editing and post-production, you can apply what we call a LUT to it, and it turns it into a normal footage, and the scene is seen more like our eye sees it rather than what the camera can reproduce, because the camera cannot reproduce what our eye can see. It doesn't have the dynamic range of our eyes. So we look at a scene and we see all the details. You take a picture and a lot of the details are missing. And that's the reason why. So when you use log footage in video, you are getting us closer to the capability of the human eye. But as I say, for 99.99% of the population, you'll never use log. You'll leave that off all of the time when you're shooting video. But it gives you an idea what this camera can do if you had to shoot video with it. It really does work. And the autofocus is actually pretty good in video mode. You can set face detection on, and it will find faces and focus. It keeps the focus on pretty good. I'm not going to say it's great, but it's pretty good. Much better than the earlier versions of this camera. So you can shoot on autofocus in video mode and have a reasonably good shot of getting everything in focus, which is great. So as a video camera, as a little video camera, it's surprisingly good. So if you want to do some outdoor video with this thing, don't be afraid of it. A couple of other things you can do. Of course, it has a tripod socket underneath, and you can see I've got a quick release on that. and I'll show you what that belongs to. So you can leave the quick release on it all of the time. And also I have a wrist strap, and especially if you're in a boat and you've got to take a picture over the side, put the wrist strap on. You know, yeah, this can go down to 30 feet. So your lake is 30 feet. This is at the bottom. It's in great shape, but you can't get it unless you hire a scuba diver. So I would say put the wrist strap on and leave it on all of the time. And you notice mine is red. So if this thing fell in the water, this thing would be more flooding in the current. I can reach down and pick that up and pull it back up again. It's very handy to have a bright wrist strap so you can see it if it falls in the water. But, you know, it's damn near indestructible in normal use, and the images from it are quite good. There are some other cheaper cameras on the market, but they all have some functionality missing that this camera has, or the macro may not be as good, or the video may not be as good. You know, there will be things that are missing, but, you know, you can get down to a couple of $100 in a waterproof outdoor camera. It won't be at this level, but it'll do the job. If you're just taking still pictures and you just want to, you know, point the camera and press the button, they'll do the job. They'll do the job just fine. And they're waterproof, and they're usually shockproof and waterproof, so they'll handle the normal, you know, life of a fishing camera. So as I say, you don't have to go to the expense of this model, but you can. Now, let's talk about a few other things that I've got here on the table. You see the GoPro over here. I hate GoPros, but I use them. They do have some important functionality if you're shooting video. The problem with cameras like this, and it's really the problem with the SD card more than the camera. The SD cards are formatted in a file system called FAT32. Now, you don't have to worry about what that is, but the functional problem is these things cannot save a file bigger than 4 gigabytes. And when you're shooting video, you can run 4 gigabytes fairly quickly. So this camera, shooting video in 4K, and it does have 4K capability, will hit that 4K limit, 4 gigabyte limit in 8 minutes. So you've got 8 minutes of video, and then the camera stops because that limit has been reached. And 1080p, that limit is somewhere between 23 and 26 minutes. So you can video straight till you hit the 4 gig limit. The GoPro has that managed. So it just keeps going until you either run out of card or run out of battery, one or the other. So when I'm shooting continuously on the water, I have to use a GoPro. But other than that, I don't use it. The audio on GoPros are terrible. Whereas the audio in this, if you're shooting video and I am, you know, shooting a video of something and I'm talking about it, the audio on it is actually quite good. So it's got a couple of mics, stereo mics in there that are waterproof, and they work fine. The GoPro, all you hear is click, clunk, clunk, click, clunk, clunk. It's just awful. But as I say, it does give you the continuous video that if that's important to you. If you just want to put a GoPro on your chest, you know, and then just go fishing and just record everything, it will do a better job than the Olympus or any other point and shoot, because they all suffer from the same problem. When they hit that 4 gig limit, they stop. So, you know, if apart from that, if you're not into continuous video, I wouldn't bother with the GoPro. Go with something like the Olympus, way better camera. The GoPro is only worth it when you are doing continuous video. And it's such a clumsy thing to use. You know, by the time, I'll tell you, this is a 5. I bought a 7. First time I used it, I went to the river with it. It wouldn't operate until it did an update, and it wouldn't let go of my phone. So it was connected to my phone, and it wouldn't let go, and it loaded that update down through my phone and blew my data plan. And it did it twice. So it ruined the entire day. I couldn't do any video because the thing was taking forever to do the update, and blew my data plan at the same time. So, you know, as I say, that's why I use the 5. It doesn't have that feature. The update, you have to do it by connecting it to a computer. That's the way I like to work. But, you know, I've got, you can tell I'm not a real fan of GoPros. But I do use them because, you know, when I want continuous video, they're the way to go. Let's talk a bit about the cards. There are very high-speed cards on the market. Your camera may not need cards of that speed, so check the recommendation of the manufacturer when you're buying a card. Just don't pull one off the wall, whether it's U1, U2, Class 10, whatever they're asking for. Just follow the manufacturer's recommendations. Buying more card than the camera needs is just wasting money. I would say if you're going to shoot still photography, 16 gigabytes is more than enough in the way of a card. And if you're going to do video, I'd say 32 gig or 64. That'll do the job. I mean, unless you're shooting a lot of 4K, you really don't need to go much bigger than that. A couple of other little things for gear. This is just a neoprene case I use and this fits on my wading belt. And being Velcro, I don't have to fiddle with clips. So, you know, it's very handy for holding the camera on my belt. This little thing, I don't even know where it came from, but it's got a thread to fit a camera. And I think it used to, oh, I remember where. It was for my Zoom H1, to turn a Zoom H1 into a handheld mic. You could make something like this. You can buy things similar to this. And you can put this on the bottom of the camera and turns it into like a selfie stick. This is a very neat gadget. This is a GorillaPod. It's a little tripod, and these legs curve around. You can actually hook it to a tree branch, for example. You can put it flat on the ground. You can use it like this with the selfie stick. You can turn this into a selfie stick. This will fit in the back of your vest, no problem, or into a sling pack, I should say. That's where the quick release attaches. It's on the bottom of the camera, so you can flip it on and off very easily, very quickly. I don't think most people would bother with a tripod, but this tripod I've got here, it wasn't cheap, and you know, it broke. You can see there's electrical tape right here. I wasn't impressed. If you wanted to bring a tripod on the water, you want something about this size. Don't go too flimsy, because the last thing you want to do is put your tripod down in some current and have the current blow it right over. So you got to have something with a bit of heft. But as I say, most of the time you're not going to use a tripod. Once in a while you might take it out. Let's say if you're on a boat, I'd throw a tripod on the boat just in case you wanted to use it. Tripods are especially useful for shooting video. We're keeping everything steady. And also it is good when you want to take video of yourself. So just plant the tripod and then go off and go fishing. And while we're on the subject of keeping things steady, I forgot to mention this has image stabilization both in still mode and in video mode, so it handles camera shake. So when you're using the movie image stabilization, that's a little different than still photography stabilization. And that gives you even greater low light capability. It means you can shoot handheld in very low light, and this thing will still give you a clear image. And that's something else you may not see on the cheaper cameras, is you may not see the image stabilization. So that's another good feature about the TG series of cameras. So that's basically what I take on the water, primarily this and my case. Those are usually the two, and I'm most likely, if I'm going to add something else, it'll be the GorillaPod. And I'll hook my camera up to anything, one tree branch, clamp it to the tree branch, then go out and fish, shoot some video, and then take it off the tree branch and move on to my next spot. Very, very handy, and as I say, it fits in the back of the vest without any problems. If you want, as I say, to do continuous footage, GoPro on a chest mount, and you're good to go, as I say, but don't rely on the audio. The audio is crap. So that's basically what I do when I'm doing very simple on-water still or video, and you know, it works just fine. I'd recommend, you know, obviously we're limited by budgets. If you can afford the TG5 or TG6 now, go for it. It's the best camera on the market as far as I'm concerned, at a reasonable price. But there are cameras down as low as $200 or in that range. Fujifilm has their fine pics. You've got Nikon Coolpix. Canon has some. So there's plenty of choice out there, and I think there's a camera to fit pretty well every budget. The last thing I didn't talk about, but is perfectly usable, is the modern cell phone. I mean, my iPhone 10 is moderately waterproof, so I can take it on the river and use it to take photos with or video. It's not as good as this camera. Okay, you're not as feature-filled. You can't do as much as you can with this camera, but it is usable. And in an emergency, when I've been out and I've got a big fish and I don't have a camera with me, I pull the phone out. It works fine. So you can use phones. I find handling the phone, I mean, I can shoot this one hand, no trouble. Handling the phone with one hand and trying to take the picture, it sometimes can get fiddly. So if you've got a rod in one hand, a phone in the other, it's usually a recipe for dropping it in the water. So I tend not to use my phone on the water. Plus, my iPhone 10 was twice the price as this thing. So, you know, I'm risking a lot more money when I'm fiddling around with an expensive phone. So if you say to yourself, well, my phone is waterproof, and, you know, why buy another camera? Well, I look at it both in terms of the capabilities and the expense. You're risking an expensive device, and it's not as good as this when it comes to working, you know, on the river and in the river. So there we go. That's the way I use my cameras and my gear. Cheers.